If the effort would have been put into it, certainly.
May God bless Carla Faye Tucker, and God bless her victims and their families.
I think a lot of the issues concerning future dangerousness, I've had a lot of the appeals of capital cases.
Thank you. And probably see, I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
I know they did, because I was no professional.
Number 4, Carla Tucker. Carla Faye Tucker was a woman of many faces, a troubled teenager, a drug addict, a born-again Christian, a convicted slayer, and a celebrity in the fight against the capital penalty. Born in Houston, Texas in 1959, Carla Faye Tucker had a tumultuous childhood, marked by harm, neglect, and drug addiction. She ran away from home at the age of 14 and soon fell in with a rough crowd. By the time she was 21, she had become a hardened criminal involved in a string of robberies, burglaries, and drug deals. It was during this period that Carla met Danny Garrett, a fellow drug user and small-time criminal. The two became inseparable, and soon they were living together in a drug-fueled haze. In June 1983, they decided to rob the home of Jerry Lynn Dean, a middle-aged man who had recently moved to Houston. What they didn't know was that Dean was home, and he surprised them with a shotgun. In the ensuing struggle, Dean was slain with a pickaxe, which Carla had brought along as a tool for breaking into the house. Carla and Danny fled the scene, but they were arrested a few days later. They were both charged with slaying, and Carla was eventually convicted and sentenced to her demise.
The courts, including the United States Supreme Court, have reviewed the legal issues in this case.
If the effort would have been put into it, certainly.
May God bless Carla Faye Tucker, and God bless her victims and their families.
And nobody stopped to really...
As she was dying, I did ask God to have mercy on her soul.
Signs all throughout my childhood that there was something wrong.
And her dying was also the right thing to do.
Look how she's ending up. So he ended up sending me to my mother.
She became the first woman to be fatally punished in Texas since the Civil War. What makes Carla Faye Tucker's story so compelling is not just the heinousness of her crime, but the way she transformed herself in prison. After her conviction, Carla turned to religion and became a devout Christian. She also became an advocate for prison reform and spoke out against the penalty. In the years leading up to her punishment,
and therefore I will not grant a 30-day stay.
I was out of control, and he was under the threat of my mother.
We feel like the system and the process has got to be changed.
You know, that if he ever laid a hand on me, she'd call the police on him, so...
It was the right thing to do.
But they didn't, no. And there were absolutely... He was like in between a rock and a hard spot if I...
And that's no greater evidence than with Carla.
So I was just left to destruct. Somebody out there could have gotten hold of me. If trying to discipline her, I'll get sent to jail. If I don't...
Carla became a symbol of the debate over capital punishment. In the end, Carla Faye Tucker was fatally punished on February 3, 1998, despite widespread protests and appeals for clemency. Her demise sparked a renewed debate over the capital penalty, with some calling for a moratorium on such punishments and others arguing that justice had been served. She was the first woman to be punished fatally in Texas in 135 years. Number 3, Kimberly McCarthy. Kimberly McCarthy was a woman of many contradictions, a loving mother, a college graduate, and a convicted slayer. Born in 1961 in Greenville, Texas, Kimberly McCarthy grew up in a household marked by poverty and domestic violence. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother struggled to make ends meet. As a teenager, Kimberly turned to drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with the pain and trauma of her childhood. Despite these challenges, Kimberly managed to graduate from high school and attend college. She earned a degree in psychology and went on to work as a counselor for troubled youth. But her demons never truly left her, and she continued to struggle with addiction and depression. In 1997, Kimberly's life took a dark turn when she was arrested for the slaying of Dorothy Booth, an elderly neighbor. Booth had been fatally knifed in her home, and McCarthy's fingerprints were found at the scene. She was eventually convicted of slaying and sentenced to the capital punishment. What makes Kimberly McCarthy's story so interesting is the way she managed to find hope and meaning in the midst of her imprisonment. While on the row, she became an advocate for prison reform and a mentor to other incarcerated women. She also turned to art as a way to express her emotions and connect with others. One of the most striking aspects of Kimberly's story is the way she was able to forge deep and meaningful relationships.
Or out of prison, and now that we have a vehicle to keep a person in prison for the balance of their lives, it just changes the equation. We at one time had more people on death row than any other county in Texas. Time that a person goes to trial until that person is finally executed. There are a number of safeguards in the system. I think a lot of the issues concerning future dangerousness, I've had a lot of the appeals of capital cases. And that provides for a lot of expensive avenues to make sure that the conviction and death sentence is sound, stemmed around the fact of whether or not a person would be a danger in prison.
Despite the walls that separated her from the outside world, she corresponded regularly with pen pals and supporters, and even developed a close friendship with one of her former prosecutors. Kimberly McCarthy was punished on June 26, 2013, at the age of 52. Number 2, Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos had spent 12 years on the row before she walked into the chamber of demise, after fighting against a system that had failed her at every turn. Eileen's story is one of pain and trauma, a life marked by poverty and violence. Her father was an alcoholic who harmed her physically, emotionally, and intimately, while her mother abandoned her and her brother when they were young. Having previously been a ward of the state, Wuornos subsisted on a vagabond existence as an adult, hitchhiking and engaging in bodywork to survive. As an adult, Wuornos met 24-year-old Tyria Moore in Daytona, Florida, and the two embarked on a romantic relationship. It would later be revealed that from late 1989 into the fall of 1990, Wuornos had slain at least 6 men along Florida highways. In mid-December 1989, the body of Richard Mallory was found in a junkyard, with 5 more men's bodies to be discovered over subsequent months. Authorities were eventually able to track down Wuornos and Moore from fingerprints and palm prints left in the crashed vehicle of another missing man, Peter Sims. Wuornos was arrested in a bar in Port Orange, Florida, while police tracked down Moore in Pennsylvania. To avoid prosecution, Moore made a deal, and in mid-January 1991, she elicited a phone confession from Wuornos, who took full and sole responsibility for the slayings. A media frenzy ensued over the case, due in part to the lurid nature of the crimes. During the trial, she stated that her slaying of the men had been in self-defense, though she would later retract those statements. On January 27, 1992, a jury found Wuornos guilty of first-degree slaying in the Mallory case, and she received the capital punishment. Spending a decade on the row, Wuornos eventually opted to fire her appeals lawyers, who were working for a stay, but a court-appointed attorney was concerned about comments made by Wuornos that suggested she was profoundly disconnected from reality.
I am prepared to die if you say it is necessary.
I'm okay. I'm okay. God is going to be there. Jesus Christ is going to be there. All the angels and everything.
You know, I was just wondering how you're going to be, you know, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared.
Thank you. And probably see, I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
I know they did, because I was no professional.
Case number 91-112, Citrus County case number.
I'm all right with it, but like I said,
I sentence you to death for the murder of David Spears.
the cops knew who I was after Richard Mallory died.
I am sorry that my acts of self-defense ended up in court like this. I am sorry for all the pain that my actions have caused.
Remember, let them know that I know that I left prints everywhere and they covered it up.
To death for the murder of Troy Burris. I sentence you to death for the murder of Charles Humphreys.
The cops knew who I was after Richard Mallory died and let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer.
In 2002, Florida Governor Jeb Bush lifted a temporary stay of her punishment after 3 psychiatrists deemed her mentally competent to understand her situation and the reasons for its implementation. Wuornos was punished by lethal injection on the morning of October 9, 2002. Her reported last words were, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6. Like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." Number 1, Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was the first woman fatally punished in North Carolina after the capital punishment was reinstituted in 1976 and the first woman to perish by lethal injection. Born in 1932 on a small tobacco and cotton farm in rural South Carolina, she was one of 9 children. At the age of 17, Barfield dropped out of school in order to marry her boyfriend, Thomas Burke. They had 2 children together and lived in Parkton, North Carolina. In 1965, Thomas was in a car accident and had a concussion. From that point on, he suffered severe headaches, and his drinking increased as a way to deal with his pain. In 1969, while Velma was away attending to errands, the couple's house mysteriously caught fire. Thomas perished in the fire from smoke inhalation. A few months later, a second fire engulfed the house, burning it to the ground. A few months after Thomas Burke's demise, Velma began dating a widower named Jennings Barfield. The two married in August 1970, but their marriage only lasted a few months. Jennings Barfield perished in 1971 of heart failure. In the summer of 1974, Velma's mother began complaining of severe stomach pains. She was admitted to an area hospital but sent home when her symptoms subsided. In December of that same year, Velma's mother, Lily McMillan Bullard, again showed symptoms of a serious stomach illness. She was rushed to the hospital and was pronounced deceased only 2 hours after being admitted. The doctors were unable to diagnose Lily Bullard's fatal illness, nor was an autopsy performed. In 1975, Velma Barfield served 6 months in prison for writing several bad checks. Upon her release, Velma secured a job as a home health nurse for an elderly couple, 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife Dolly. In January 1977, Montgomery Edwards perished. A few weeks later, Dolly Edwards parted, having developed a strange stomach virus. Velma Barfield was reassigned to care for a second elderly couple, John Henry and Record Lee. John Henry Lee perished in June 1977, his doctors diagnosing it only as a severe stomach virus. Shortly thereafter, Velma moved in with her boyfriend, Stuart Taylor. One day, Stuart began to complain of severe stomach pain. He was later admitted to the hospital and was gone within a matter of days. An anonymous tipster, later revealed to be Velma's sister, notified police that Velma had slain others in a similar way that she had slain Stuart. Barfield was arrested and later confessed to poisoning with arsenic Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry Lee, and her mother, Lily Bullard. She claimed that she had slain them in order to cover up the fact that she had stolen money from them to support her illicit drug use. Velma was given the capital punishment. She was the state's only female end-row inmate. Velma Barfield was punished on November 2, 1984 at Central Prison in Raleigh. She was 52 years old at the time of her demise.
The first week I was here was the worst week that I have spent. Isolation from everybody that I had been with. Days of not knowing where you are or what you've done. The last 10 years was just like that. Living in prison every day is a struggle, even at its best.
That's all for today, folks. See you next time.